distinguished friends from civil society, private sector, academia, and media, good afternoon. So thank you, my dear brother Andrew, for the invitation. I missed the feedback by my friend Charlotte. I like the idea of the phrase that we used to describe what Charlotte said, uncomfortable truths. And that's one of the important conversations that need to happen when we discuss human rights issues. But there's a certain degree of comfort and safety. So I think has been well mentioned, the fact that you have government institutions present, PS, Human Rights Commission, all the others, development partners, different colleagues present, private sector. That is the spirit of development. That is the spirit of the agenda that a state owes to its public. Because the constituencies of the state are not just the government and its various institutions. They include the private sector. They include civil society. They include community groups. And none is more important than the other, but each have separate functions and responsibilities. Of course, the functions of the government are put it more in the visible area. And if you're in charge of peace and security issues, everybody says you're the most important one. And second, because most of the international instruments are signed by the state on behalf of the rest of the constituents anyway. But we recognize the interdependency of the relationship. So clearly, the idea that we have this forum to amplify the voices of civil society, demonstrate our shared values for accountability, for justice and dignity for all. So that matters a lot to us. We know that state are the duty bearers, so the primary responsibilities with the state. But I think it's important to acknowledge, as many colleagues have mentioned, the transition that has happened over several years, the fact that this conversation is now taking place. And I think one of the panelists mentioned the fact that this whole idea of shadow reports would have meant in the past that if it's a shadow, it means you're suspicious. But now there's no suspicion about it, because these are complementary reports that reinforce the national development process. I also want to acknowledge the role that the government played, especially the minister, in the presentation of the 5th periodic report before the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in Geneva this year. I think it was a clearly reaffirming moment for Rwanda because it demonstrates the state's commitment to embedding human rights, all human rights in its processes at the heart of the development agenda. So what we review today, this review on the UPR, and the statistics have been mentioned, those accepted, and those that government had reservations on, but they span the plenitude of areas that are important to all of us. What is about access to justice, civil or political rights, gender equality, governance, and protection of vulnerable groups. They're important to all of us, particularly because of where we are in global development today. These are areas that are now in contestation globally. There are many states and political regimes are questioning themes and subjects we thought were settled matters. That they are settled in terms of how states and societies organize themselves, in terms of the relationship between stakeholders in the state, and in terms of their own relationship with others outside of their state. And so this idea of demonization, the idea of the othering, the otherness of states and societies, the idea of might is right. And you grab, it's almost like we've gone back to, the Hobbesian state of nature, right? Every man, you kill what you eat, and therefore grab what you want. And these are the fundamentals of the UPR review we're discussing. So it is not just an opportunity for us to celebrate this report. It's an opportunity for us to reaffirm the fundamental values that unite us as a society in Rwanda, but also unite us as a global community. Because if we don't reaffirm these fundamental values, there's a possibility we'll get carried away that what is happening in those other parts is the right thing, is the right approach. So we must reject those new notions of what it means to govern a society, of what it means that is the nature of the relationship between the state and its constituent parts. So what is happening today is more fundamental than just the discussion of a report. Because there are many platforms now where you can't even have this discussion. But the member state can say to you, we don't believe in these things, therefore don't bring them forward. So this is a reaffirmation of the values we hold dear as a global community. And this is important because when you look at the recommendations, they may be seen as statistics, but it's actually behind them, as the panelists have mentioned. It's about people and their lives. Women, children, elderly, sick, people with multiple vulnerabilities that you just can't ignore. So what they help do is to refocus our attention about what we owe to each other, but what we owe to our various societies. So this can only happen when you have the right degree of partnership. And so I join all of those who acknowledge that the space we have today to have these conversations is an important space. And please, we must not stop. We must not stop because I have mentioned in many platforms, the discourse on human rights is never about a beauty contest. Never. The discourse on human rights is not about how ugly a state and its institutions or a society looks. The discourse on human rights is the most fundamental element of our journey, our aspiration to a better society, to a good community. Because they are aspirations. Most societies will never meet all of the aspirations. But we must continue the journey, the trial, the effort to perfect our human society, to create a good society for Rwanda, for Rwandans, and for everyone who lives in Rwanda. So it will never be about a naming and a shaming or a name calling. It's actually a check-in. Where are we today in our journey to transformation? Where are we in our journey to a better society? When we do that checking in, we reaffirm our beliefs and our values and recommit ourselves to the work we do. That's why it's about the interdependence and the interdivisibility of human rights. It is even more important today because, both in the report, some of the recommendations talk about allocation of resources, capacity building and training, and some of the panelists have made that. My dear friends, we thank all our friends who are giving us support, Luxembourg, Swiss Development Corporation, and the others. They are now a minority. We acknowledge the support our friends are bringing, but please bear in mind, support from our friends is a minority, it is reducing. So we will continue to cherish what they bring. But the fundamental question is, if this is our society, if we want a more perfect society, what are we bringing in to make it better? Who else in our society should we be bringing in as champions? Because the landscape on development is changing fundamentally. It is changing. The landscape of development is that those who used to help us, who want to continue helping us, are themselves challenged by their own internal socioeconomic contradictions and regional needs. So rightly, they are shifting their resources to areas their citizens feel it's also important to them. But the converse then is what is coming to us is reducing. So don't you assume we're going to get more. We'll be happy if we did, but we have to be also pragmatic. We're likely not going to get more, so we have to do more with what we have, but we cannot be agonizing over dwindling or reducing resources. We cannot be agonizing over it. We have to be organizing around how to overcome them. We have to be organizing. So don't agonize. Organize. What do we do different in our societies? Who are our new champions in Rwanda, from private sector to community groups, everybody else? And knowing that it is not instant coffee, it will not be realized overnight. But as we say, the human rights is progressive, so we keep checking in to make sure we are realizing all of the things we want. Finally, with all these excellent recommendations, and as we prepare for the next periodic review in 2026, I'm happy that Nyakubawa PS is here and the chair of the Human Rights Commission is here. This conversation cannot end by tomorrow when you submit the report. We need a commitment from Minijust and the Human Rights Commission. We need a space to discuss some of these recommendations. Yes, my dear colleagues have made some important points. What needs to change, what doesn't need to change. But as we prepare for 2026, are there legislative reforms that need to happen? Are there new conversations that we need to happen? How do we embed our desire for socio-economic transformation in Rwanda while ensuring that no one is excluded? That our transformation must not happen on the backs of the poor and the excluded. How are we ensuring that we are carrying them along as we move on, at the same time as we want a transformed society that is middle income by 2035 and upper middle income by 2050? Because there's a risk that in that journey to transformation, more people might be left behind. So how do we find the balance? These are important conversations we need to have so that as we prepare for 2026, we'll feed them into our own process going ahead. So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to to share with everybody else, but I wish us a wonderful conversation going ahead. For us as a United Nations system, as you very well know, as we say in Nigeria, no leave, no transfer. We're here, we're ready, we're with you, we participate in the conversations. And what I like is that spirit of inclusion, everyone participating. We have another saying in Nigeria: you want my presence? Then don't shave my head in my absence. So we need everybody present and participating.